Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann, and I'm here with Jeremy Jordan, star of The Great Gatsby on Broadway. No pressure, Jeremy, but I feel like Gatsby is maybe one of the most popular, fascinating literary characters of all time, perhaps. So, was there like an element within how he's described in the novel that you really kind of honed in on, that spoke to you, that you wanted to incorporate into your version?
Sure. I mean, there were lots of elements. I mean, for me personally, like I really wanted to like discover what wasn't there. Like that was more exciting. But like for what like people know of him, I think that just his sort of enigmatic, sort of mysterious qualities are were always really exciting for me. I tend to be like such a goofball in real life and silly that I had to tap into sort of that very serious and not to say that he's always serious, but like kind of personality that can go from nothing to having to becoming one of the richest people in Long Island in a very short period of time requires a very specific kind of person. So that's what I was really interested in delving into, what kind of personality that requires, and then what his drive is in doing that. And there's a romanticism to the fact that he's doing it for a woman. There's also a sort of mania, I think, that goes with that, that you see glimpses of in the book, but I think we pulled out a little bit more in the show, which has been really fun.
Yeah, I feel like one of the words that I always associate with him was mysterious. There is a lot that
Yeah.
isn't there, right? So
Yeah.
when the character is such an enigma, when that is such a core piece of him, how do you go about like setting his intention, setting his voice? Where do you start?
Yeah. Well, what's great about Gatsby is that he has constructed everything around him and within him. It's all false. And it's kind of to such a degree that it's believable to himself. It's like when you tell yourself something so much that it just becomes true. And that's the only way that I think someone like that can actually thrive and actually make it work in this way. And so he never breaks character. I mean, he's actually from North Dakota, and he's got this like posh New England accent. And so that's always fun to sort of like live in the falsity of it, but the sort of unwitting falsity of it, because he's so it's like talented Mr. Ripley kind of in a way, in that he doesn't like where he came from, and so he's just decided that he's going to be someone else. And that's the only way to get forward and the only way to actually make a difference and make a name for himself in this world. And as to the mystery of it, um one of the big changes we made from Paper Mill is that I like sort of introduced the story at Paper Mill and like was in the opening number, but in that way, like it gave the audience like a very clear window into my character. And that's something that we wanted to avoid to sort of preserve the mystery. And I think we try to hold on to it as long as possible. Um, but then as soon as sort of Daisy comes in, she starts to break him down. And over the course of the play, I have like utter control until by the end of my journey, at least, that control dissolves. And you just see him like trying to grasp and hold on to it. And the only way to sort of maintain mystery is to have complete control.
Yeah. It's interesting because you described his mania towards Daisy, and it is
Mhm.
very obsessive, and yet he has built this whole that obsessiveness seems genuine, but he has built this whole artifice of his life. How do you
Yeah.
kind of square those two, what would seem to be very opposing sides of a person?
Well, I think that he built that artifice from a very early age before he met Daisy. So when he met Daisy, he introduced himself as Jay Gatsby. And even though he didn't have any money, he held this persona. He sort of very much had already curated who he was going to be. It just happened that he had to go fight a war for a minute and like delay his inevitable rise to power. you know and And so I think Daisy actually, with any normal person, would be the thing that sort of broke that down and deconstructed it. But because he had so little time with her and then had to go to war and sort of pine after this person and be the thing that he fought for, coming back to her, and then to come back and she's not there, it just drives him farther and farther and faster. Whereas if he just was able to attain this woman, which was way above his own status, and get her quickly and fall in love like a normal human being, I think his journey would have been a lot different and a lot
Mm,
more sort of gradual, even if he did have a sort of rise and growth of status. But because all the other cards were so stacked against him, um, I think he just drove even farther and harder. And to say he did it for love is one thing, but I think the love went way past what normal love go does. I mean, it went past obsession. It went to, complete compulsion. It went to mania. It went to like these very strange, odd places to where it's not even about Daisy anymore. Daisy is this ideal, one of the great lines in the book, and I'm horribly paraphrasing, is that Fitzgerald basically, well, the character of Nick in the book describes Gatsby's love for Daisy as completely unattainable because there is no way that any human woman could ever embody the vision of love that he has in his head for this woman.
mm. There's a lot of lines in the book that have become very well known, very iconic, and we've seen a ton of adaptations of this story already. There's the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, there's two famous movies. Is there temptation to go back to those older adaptations, or do you have to
I,
kind of stay away from that?
I haven't. I do that very, very purposefully because, at least for me, like I'll read the book and I'll read the book a couple times, but I won't read it like a ton of times because our adaptation is, different in certain ways. Um, but no, I mean, I saw the DiCaprio movie when it came out. I never saw is it Robert Redford
Hmm.
version? I haven't seen that one. And, when I first started, I remember seeing some like clips on YouTube or something of some like scenes from that DiCaprio movie. And he says some of the same lines that we say in the show. And then for months doing the show, specifically at Paper Mill, every time I get to that line, I just hear him in my head. So it's like I can't I can't have anybody else's performance in my brain because then it takes me out of it. So I have to sort of create it on my own. I think I have my own sort of mania in that regard. You know, some people like I know Eva, she's watched the movie a ton of times and it doesn't affect her performance. She's got her own sort of thing. And I don't not saying it would affect my performance, but I think that it helps me to feel ownership of the character, to not have other voices in my head.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about your voice in this show actually, because I think you've performed a lot of different styles of musicals, but
Mm.
I would say probably many of your most well-known ones have a more contemporary, almost pop-driven sound to them. This
Yeah.
one feels very big, very lush classic musical theater style. What is it
Yeah.
like to explore that part of your voice on stage right now?
I love it so much. I mean, I'm classically trained, and so like it takes me back to my roots. I've sort of had to force the pop, modern rock kind of influences on musical theater into my performances, for other things. And not to say that I don't enjoy doing that, because I do, it's fun. But there is nothing like just like going back to your roots and just letting it just sort of come over you. And it's just like this beautiful sort of legato, and it's almost like a massage to your vocal cords when you get to sing that kind of style, because the reason it's, classical training is because it's also the healthiest way of singing. And so I'm not like forcing or pushing or doing stuff like that. Not to say that I don't do that on occasion. There is definitely yelling and shouting and belting in the show as well. But specifically with my first song, I had this song called For Her, which is sort of while he's still in his mysterious phase of the show, is just this beautiful, lush, classical ballad. Which and it actually, even though it's easy to sing, it's the hardest number in the show because it's so exposed and you can't really hide behind anything. And that's the other thing about this style is that like if you're not locked in, like it's very hard to hide any errors or any sort of odd moments. Like the other day I had a I had a lozenge in my throat before the number, and so I was very this is very lubricated. And then halfway through the second verse, just something just started sliding down my throat. And I was like, no, 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 no. I was just like, well, that came out. Thankfully, it wasn't on a high note, but
Well, you have plenty of high notes in one of my favorite songs from it, which was My Greenlight, which
yeah.
is a really great duet with Eva,
Mhm.
who is a vocal powerhouse. What is it like exploring the musicality of that number with her?
Yeah, that one kind of bridges like modern musical theater and pop musical theater, which is really lovely. And one of the craziest thing about that song is it has no traditional form. Like My Green Light happens one time in the song. Like the chorus happens once. We do like the pre-chorus three times and the verse three times, but the actual chorus only happens once. Was just one of those songs that should never work. Like from a from a rule book standpoint of how to do right musical theater songs, and yet it's like the big number in Act One. It's kind of bizarre and wonderful in that way. And I think it just goes to show that, you know, this kind of story transcends, you know, a lot of the archetypes of of theater because it's just lasted so long throughout all these years that it's no matter how you tell it, the story breaks through in a really lovely way. And that's probably why so many people have resonated it for over 100 years now.
Yeah. And you're also, belting out these numbers on a set that is so massive and intricate, and always changing. I can't even imagine what the tech rehearsal process would have been like for this one. But
Yeah.
is it difficult to keep track of all those moving parts, like technical aspects to be aware of while you're also trying to stay in character?
Sometimes you're like holding on to there's like railing at the front of the stage. Sometimes you're like holding on to the railing and like singing out into the bay. And then the railing just starts to go from underneath you, like as the scene transitions, like, oh, well, I don't have railing anymore. Okay. There's like a lot of like sneaking behind the little moving pieces and then popping out. There's a lot of little things like that are more fun than worrisome, I think. But yeah, it's kind of cool to be enveloped by that lush, landscape that it's definitely bigger than anything I've ever gotten to experience on stage.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to fill it as best we can, our tiny little bodies. And
Yeah, it certainly fills the space. And you mentioned before you did this at Paper Mill Playhouse. How has the show evolved for you the most in this jump to Broadway?
I think that we have honed in a little bit more on who these characters are really individually. And I think that musically, we have really brought the show more into its original era. I think originally, like musically, the show was a little bit more poppy than it is now because we were, trying to make it accessible. And we found that the stuff that was in that vein was the stuff that worked the least. And so things have shifted, whether it's the song itself or the orchestration of the song or the performance of the song. So that's shifted a lot for me. I mean, To be honest, a lot of my stuff hasn't changed. The Gatsby of it all has always been something that has been a good anchor for us, and it's trying to make sure we're telling all the right stories with all the other characters, um, so that it all feels fluid and fits together and doesn't feel like, you know, a hodgepodge of different people sort of coming and going in this story, which can be tricky. I mean, the book has some problematic elements in terms of adaptation and just things that don't really make sense nowadays. Like probably made sense a lot in the 20s, but in a modern audience would be like, I don't, what's happening? Like, why are they're at a beautiful party? Why are they going from Long Island into New York City to go to the plaza in an unair conditioned room? Like, why? Like, but we still have to do it, because we're trying to do at least a somewhat faithful adaptation. So yeah, there
Yeah.
have been some things, but our main goal was to mitigate that and make the story as what's the word? I can't even think of words this morning. But make the story as sort of understandable as possible.
Hmm.
Poor choice of words, but you know what I mean. And while also like keeping the energy flowing and not letting anything pull us down. And the show just moves. I mean, it just moves, and doesn't stop, which is really exciting.
Well, one of the things I picked up on being in the audience was that you seem to have a very large fan base of a lot of young people coming to the
Yeah,
theater, which is great. And some of them seem very familiar with the show, that like there were even people dressed up as flappers in the audience in
yeah,
1920s outfits. But then there were definitely people around me, younger kids who I don't think had ever read Great Gatsby before, and this was their
yeah,
introduction to it. What does that feel like to maybe be able to introduce this story to
yeah. Well, I'll hit 2 points in that. Like the first is that I've realized sort of recently that I've grown into this figure in musical theater, which I had never really ever anticipating becoming, and very reluctantly so because I am a very private, like kind of person. Um, and I really attribute it a lot to Newsies. Because that show was so iconic when it came out, and now it's so accessible for schools to do and young theater groups that every young theater kid that's growing up in the business or wants to become an actor does Newsies at one point. And Jack Kelly is like that dream role for all the guys and all the girls too. And they hear my voice and they see the performance and they sort of latch onto that. And so I mean I am so eternally grateful because I'm almost 40. Like I'm not doing that anymore, but they still like see me and are like, that's the guy. So it's definitely been the gift that keeps on giving in terms of like continuing to have a younger fan base, even though like I haven't originated anything on Broadway since Newsies, musical wise. I did a play back in 2018, but yeah, it's I'm really grateful for that. And what's really exciting about introducing Gatsby to them is it's different than a lot of contemporary musical theater. What I love about Gatsby, and you touched on it a little bit before, is that it feels like that old classic epic piece that was really popular in like the 80s and early 90s, and that used to be popular way back in the day. It's sort of carrying the torch over from Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera, which are gone, and sort of holding that space, which I think is a really important and vital space to have in the musical theater community. Because as much as I love like the cool indie weird musicals that are all coming out, and I also am unashamedly love a good uh jukebox musical. I'm there is a very special place for this kind of show that is that epic sweeping musical theater, you know, adventure story, and we're really excited to sort of hold that place here.
Yes, it's very exciting to have another show like that back on Broadway.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Jeremy, for sitting down with me this morning. If you're out there watching, make sure you subscribe and stick with Gold Derby the rest of the season. Jeremy, thank you again. Great working,
Thanks,
Great
Sam.
Gatsby.
Appreciate it.